McGill Law's Ask the SAO, the podcast. In honor of Remembrance Day, November 11th, this is a special podcast devoted to the brave law students, past and present, of the Canadian Armed Forces. Canada, as part of the British Empire, entered the war on August 4th, 1914. Many McGill Law students served during the war. 20 law students and graduates lost their lives in service or shortly thereafter. The First World War ended on November 11, 1918. Returning students presented several petitions asking to complete the law program in 1.5 years instead of 3, given the time they had served. These petitions proved successful as the faculty allowed the students to continue their studies over summer breaks. Canada declared war on Germany on September 10, 1939. McGill students, graduates, and even staff members served in World War II in many different roles. By the end of the war, 7 McGill Law graduates had lost their lives fighting. I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce 3 current law students who are members of the Canadian Armed Forces. Darian Barry is a 2L student from Edmonton, Alberta. He completed a Bachelor of Arts degree, honors, in history at the University of Alberta, where he wrote an honors thesis on the French and Belgian volunteers in the Waffen-SS. Darian joined the Canadian Armed Forces in 2014 at the age of 16 and has served throughout Canada in a variety of different roles. Currently, Darian is interested in labor law issues as well as civil litigation relating to issues of defamation. Michael Poon, a current DCL student, joined the Canadian Army Forces Primary Reserves in 2004 as a logistic officer in Toronto, Ontario. Since then, he has primarily conducted staff support and training in the Greater Toronto Area, working a variety of jobs, including quartermaster, equipment transfer team leader, adjutant, platoon, and company commander in charge of 100 soldiers. Highlights include domestic deployments to Iqaluit in 2009, Northern Ontario Indigenous communities in 2016, and this summer research support as part of Operations Laser and Lentis, the Canadian Armed Forces Pandemic and Natural Disaster Response in Ontario. Promoted to the rank of captain in 2014, he was deployed as the contracting officer for Operation Reassurance in Poland in 2015 as part of NATO operations in Eastern Europe. Captain Poon completed his Juris Doctor and Master of Laws at Osgoode Hall Law School before starting the Doctor of Civil Law at McGill in 2020. Enseigné de vaisseau de première classe Frédéric Morin, officier de entraînement de navires canadiennes de Sa Majesté Radisson. Frédéric Morin s'est enrôlé dans les réserves de la Marine royale canadienne en 2017. Après avoir gradué de Cégep de Trois-Rivières en sciences humaines comme étudiante athlète en volleyball, Frédéric a joint la Canadian Forces Fleet School pour y effectuer son cours d'officier de renseignement. En mars 2019, après avoir complété avec succès sa formation, elle a agi comme chercheuse et analyste de sources ouvertes pour le quartier général de Forces armées canadiennes basé à Ottawa. Elle a été 2020 en raison de la situation sociale particulière liée à la pandémie de COVID-19. Frédéric a été déployé comme officière adjointe de peloton dans le cadre de l'opération Laser. Elle y a co-rédigé un peloton de 45 membres dans le support à personnel médical d'un centre d'hébergement et de soins longue durée. Dès son retour en classe à l'automne 2020, enseignante première Morin a pris en charge le département de l'entraînement de sa unité d'appartenance, le navire canadien de Sa Majesté Radisson. Bonjour, Michael, Frédéric et Darian. Bienvenue à McGill Law's Ask the SAO, the podcast. Merci de m'avoir rejoint aujourd'hui. Pourriez-vous chacune parler un peu de vous, de la branche de Forces armées canadiennes avec laquelle vous appartenez et les raisons pour lesquelles vous choisissez d'étudier le droit? Frédéric, voudrez-vous commencer, s'il vous plaît?
Oui, avec plaisir. Donc, bonjour, je suis l'enseigne des vaisseaux de première classe Frédéric Morin et je suis officier de renseignement pour la Marine royale canadienne depuis 2017. Avant d'intégrer la faculté, j'ai obtenu mon diplôme du Cégep de Trois-Rivières en sciences humaines comme étudiante en volleyball. Puis, j'ai gradué de la Canadian Forces Fleet School en renseignement. Mon intérêt pour le droit, c'est surtout développé par mon travail avec la branche du renseignement. Plus précisément, j'ai été très intéressée par les enjeux éthiques qui sous-tendent les opérations et la gouvernance militaire. Puis, j'ai voulu enrichir mes analyses en renseignement avec la perspective juridique qui nécessite des connaissances plus techniques. Donc, j'ai voulu en apprendre plus sur tous les enjeux de nature internationale puis de droit maritime. Donc, voilà, j'ai appliqué à McGill avec en tête de rejoindre mes intérêts puis de profiter d'une compréhension plus large des enjeux.
Bon, parfait, merci. Darian, est-ce que tu peux maintenant commencer?
Oui, avec plaisir. Je vais parler en anglais juste pour l'introduction. Donc, so I'm Darian. I'm Darian Barry. I'm a corporal with the Canadian Armed Forces. I joined in 2014. I'm an armored soldier. So before coming to McGill, I did my undergrad at the University of Alberta in history. I did an honors thesis on the SS and French and Walloons, so French-speaking Belgians that were in the unit. And then, yes, that's basically that for my undergrad. In terms of my interests here at McGill, in terms of the law, interested in labor law, also interested in civil litigation. Sure, that doesn't really have too much. There's not a whole lot of connections there with what I do on the Army side. But there's certain principles that we're taught in the military, certain life skills, certain personal skills that we learn through our training that I think are definitely applicable to civil litigation sort of work that you can expect in a firm. So that's basically that.
Thank you. Michael, would you like to share your thoughts and your experience and kind of your trajectory? Since you're a DCL now, there's been a little bit more of a legal study side to yourself. So if you'd like to share a little bit.
Yeah, so just very briefly, I am like Darian in the Canadian Army. I'm a captain in the reserves as a logistics officer, and I joined in 2004. So my trajectory is, like you said, Nancy, it's academic side in that I did my undergrad at U of T in peace and conflict. Did 2 years off of like thinking I was going to Afghanistan, didn't happen. So then I went to law school at Osgood, and then I did my LLM there as well. And after that, I did basically a lot of part-time work for the Army. I deployed to Poland in 2015. And I'm doing my doctorate right now here at McGill. And I guess my research interests kind of dovetail with the military. So for my master's paper, I did one on how the Canadian Armed Forces deals or doesn't deal with lawfare. And for my doctorate, it's about the CAF kind of view of law internally with respect to Operation Honor, which is designed to eliminate harmful and inappropriate sexual behavior and deal with sexual assault, as well as externally in terms of like how it's dealing with gray zone conflict, specifically lawfare. So that's kind of how my trajectory has gone in that my kind of professional life in the reserves has paralleled my academic interests.
Thank you. We all know that the Canadian Armed Forces are often called up to engage with community service, whether it be during a natural disaster or, as of now, a pandemic. Recently, the Canadian Army Forces was called upon to play a big role in the COVID-19 response, both in Quebec and Ontario. I know some of you have had experience with dealing with that. Are you able to talk a little bit about the experience, Frédéric or Michael?
Oui, donc moi, en avril 2020, j'étais en pleine session d'examen, puis on m'a appelé, on m'a dit que j'allais être déployée en raison de la pandémie. Donc, je ne savais pas encore ça allait être quoi mes tâches exactement, mais j'ai accepté quand même parce que je savais que ça allait être une belle opportunité d'entrer en contact avec la communauté. On a commencé par suivre des formations à Valcartier avec l'équipe médicale pour se familiariser avec les soins aux résidents. Puis ensuite, on m'a assigné une section de marins avec laquelle j'ai intégré un peloton d'infanterie. Puis, on a déployé ensemble dans un CHSLD. Donc, notre mission principale, c'est vraiment de supporter le personnel médical civil en place là-bas. Les tâches qu'on pouvait faire, venir en aide pour donner les bains, les soins d'hygiène de base, donner les repas, faire bouger les résidents dans la mesure du possible. On pouvait aussi faire des tâches de nettoyage, de désinfection. Puis voilà, on essayait de distraire un peu les résidents, puis de faire respirer un peu le personnel médical qui en donnait beaucoup aussi sur le terrain. Puis c'est ça, cette expérience-là, pour moi, ça a été extrêmement formateur à plusieurs niveaux. Professionnellement, au niveau de leadership, gestion, administration, j'avais plusieurs membres sous ma responsabilité, puis c'était comme mon premier vrai déploiement comme officier. Donc, je devais m'assurer que les membres mangent, qu'ils dorment bien, que le moral était bon. Ce qu'il faut comprendre, c'est qu'un déploiement avec les Forces armées canadiennes, ça n'implique pas un horaire de travail de 8 à 4 conventionnel. Donc, à la fin de la journée, quand on retourne s'isoler, c'est comme une petite famille, il faut en prendre soin. Donc, c'est encore l'équipe de commandement qui va s'assurer que les besoins sont satisfaits. Donc, pour moi, ça a été un gros défi, surtout que mon équipe était nouvelle, puis on s'est formé hyper rapidement, on ne se connaissait pas beaucoup. Donc, ça a été un gros défi logistique au début de se mettre en branle puis que ça fonctionne bien. Puis aussi, au niveau personnel, ça a été un gros défi aussi parce que j'ai un malaise naturel avec le milieu médical. Donc, quand j'ai appris que j'allais aller dans un CHSLD, ma grand-mère a beaucoup ri de moi, en fait, parce que j'avais dit que je ne travaillerais jamais dans le milieu de la santé. Puis, en fait, j'ai beaucoup apprécié cette opportunité-là parce que ça m'a prouvé que j'étais capable de le faire. Puis, ça m'a obligée, en fait, à braver cet inconfort. Puis, au final, de recevoir la gratitude des personnes là-bas, que ce soit les résidents, leurs familles, des communautés, des médias, mais ça m'a rendu vraiment fière d'avoir sorti de ma zone de confort puis d'avoir apporté un soutien aux communautés.
Thank you. Michael.
So my experience was not at the ground level per se, and so I supported the pandemic response in two parts. And the first one was for what was called Operation Globe. So that was when Canadians were being returned from the Diamond Princess cruise ship at Canadian Forces Base Trenton. So for that one, I was a liaison officer and I was a administration officer as well. So a lot of it was dealing with things like command posts. Buying equipment became something that I helped with a little. And just kind of helping on that side, linking into the headquarters in Toronto. So unlike the situation in Quebec, our headquarters is in Ontario, and our deployment to the long-term care homes came later. So then for the phase where we sent soldiers to the long-term care homes in Ontario under the Joint Task Force Central or 4th Canadian Division headquarters, I did a lot of research. So that included things like the issues surrounding long-term care homes in Ontario, potentially fighting forest fires in Northern Ontario, and other research like that. So I was pretty much like working from home for the second part of my deployment. So that was my deployment, was like sitting in front of a laptop and dealing with administration sometimes. The first part in Trenton was a bit more go, and I think I slept like 3 hours over 2 days when I first got there. But it was good in that hearing that the research that we did was useful for the headquarters.
Great. And Darian, would you like to share some of your experiences?
Yeah, so I was kind of similar to Fred, although a little bit different. When the pandemic hit, I too got a call like saying that you possibly deployed or whatever. So what happened with me is I started doing all the training as well to get sent. But I was never actually sent into a CHSLD, so I was put into kind of a sort of pool with all the other soldiers that were available that weren't called in that first wave. So eventually some of us started getting called out as they needed replacements for Operation Laser. And then as the summer went on, the Canadian Armed Forces decided to pick up training as well. So I was sent to Valcartier, where I was on a course. I was essentially in an administrative role, and I worked for a infantry. It's called DP1. It's essentially their first training course where they get qualified. So I was working in that. So essentially, what my role was I worked in collaboration with the people that are teaching the course to the soldiers, and so I was responsible for helping them get all the necessary sort of equipment that they needed, all whether it be stuff related to teaching the course, so like pencils, paper, stuff like that, very like menial tasks, to also doing stuff related to dealing with food and all that stuff. So I had a very broad experience in that sense. So yeah, that was my experience with the pandemic, and then operating in the pandemic as well, although never deployed to a CHSLD.
Great, thank you for sharing. If we could jump into your law studies, comment le Force Armée canadienne vous a-t-il préparé à l'étude de droit? Encore, Frédéric, est-ce que tu veux commencer votre expérience?
Oui, donc à travers le militaire, des valeurs qu'on apprend, c'est vraiment la discipline, la gestion du temps, la gestion du stress. Pour moi, le militaire, c'est aussi de devenir confortable dans l'inconfort. Donc, à travers ma carrière, j'ai vraiment appris à sortir de ma zone de confort puis à développer des stratégies pour rester concentré et calme malgré les situations stressantes. Donc, je pense que ça m'aide beaucoup dans mes études de droit quand je me sens un peu débordée, que j'ai trop de travaux, je suis vraiment capable de rationaliser. Puis, en fait, au-delà des aptitudes de communication puis de recherche que j'ai appris avec mon métier comme en renseignement, je pense vraiment que c'est les valeurs de base militaires qui m'aident le plus. Donc, cette capacité-là à me fixer un objectif puis à être capable de mettre en place les stratégies pour le rencontrer.
Michael?
So on my end, especially at the graduate level, I found that law school for me, the military is a very good fit in that unlike what you might think about, people being economical with like the law in armed conflict, is that it is very much suffused by the law. The law is everywhere in the Canadian Armed Forces. Again, from the date that while you're enrolling to when you release, like everything is governed by rules, regulations, and for example, the National Defense Act covers a lot of what we can and can't do when we're on service. And so I found that military training in this case, also because of my role as a unit adjutant, for example, which is the senior human resources administrator for a unit, is that you are basically required to apply a lot of law. And I was also a contracting officer in Poland. And so you're required to apply a lot of law, to be honest, in that, most people don't necessarily have a legal background, but many officers will work with the law. And I found that was good in that it gave a practical component to issues you deal with in law school about, okay, here's the contract, here's the theory. But then when you're trying to actually be a contract officer and implement it overseas, then the theory becomes, very much gets illustrated in reality. So I found that was the best preparation, was that it exposes one to the execution of law at a very intimate level.
Darian.
So just like Fred said, it gives you experience with leadership activities, stress management, time management, things like that. One thing that I think is a little bit different from my experience than the other two, so Fred and Michael, is that so I'm a member of the ranks. I'm in a different role. As officers, they are more involved with the planning and they have essentially a different job than what I would do. I'm more involved in the actual conduct of like an on the ground operation, right? So when you think of the way I kind of put it is, you think of a movie and you see people doing stuff that you would assume is in the army, those are usually members of the ranks. So unless it's an officer, but yeah, usually those will be members of the ranks. So my experience with that, how that relates to the law faculty and more the legal profession, I think in general, is that although officers do have to learn how to follow, that's obvious, when they follow their chain of command, I think more with the members of the ranks, perhaps there's a different experience in the sense that when you first join, you're not giving any sort of orders at all, as opposed to an officer who will be in charge of people pretty much right from the get-go. So for me, that gives you an appreciation of learning to follow, and then through experience, learning to lead. So I think in the legal profession, that could be extremely useful. That's also useful in my studies, because I think from what I've learned prior to joining the military, I was much more of a person who is eager to contribute to conversations that or issues, whether it be at school, like a project. I was very eager to contribute all the time, even if I didn't really know the domain which I was talking about, but from the Army, I learned to take sort of a bit of a step back, get some experience, actually engage with something before talking about it. So I think that's something that could help in my legal studies quite a bit, to actually seek out help. That's kind of what I'm getting to, is to seek out help when you need it, to really focus on working before teaching in that way. Another thing that I think the military helped me prepare me for the faculty itself is just bilingualism. So when I first joined, I only spoke English. Then in the Canadian military, especially when I was out west, there were even quite a few francophones who were out west, right? So I would practice my French with them before I got here, and then just working at Valcartier, that helped a lot as well. It was an immense help, because there's a difference between the French spoken at the faculty versus the French spoken in a Canadian Armed Forces base with people who don't have the same experience, right? So that was yeah. So that was I remember when I was I don't know if I have time for story, but I remember
you do, yes.
Okay, perfect. Right on, let's go. So I show up to Valcartier, and this guy, he's a Quebecois dude in the infantry. He starts talking, and I'm like, what is happening? What is this guy saying to me? So at the end of my time there, though, I was extremely confident having conversations with people in my second language, right? And so what I find now is when I'm doing I'm looking at doing corps of stage, right? So I'm doing a lot of recruiting events. I have no problem engaging in French with lawyers in Montreal, and that could only be an asset, right? Considering it's Quebec. So I think that's one just sort of a nuance that I'd like to add, that in a way that the Canadian military helped me was in terms of language skills as well.
Super. And how do you balance now? Are you still part-time? Could you still be called out if necessary? And how do you balance that part of your career with your current law studies? How do you maintain a balance between the two? I don't know. Michael, would you like to start? Oh, no, Darian, please go ahead. Please.
All right. Okay. Perfect. Okay. So balancing, just what Fred said, this is why I talked first, came right to mind, just time management. So in terms of planning, always keeping ahead, but what we do, so we can do exercises, certain training. I work every Tuesday, and then so today, in fact, and then on the weekends there's exercises that we do as well. Throughout the if we think about throughout the academic year, it's also the training year, but the academic year, we'll be doing stuff on weekends as well. I'll be training with the unit on Saturday. And then in the summer, we have full-time opportunities as well, but you can also do that throughout the year, take contracts to do that. So that was just what I wanted to add. Just came right to mind, basically time management, and then talk a little bit about how that worked.
Michael.
Okay. So actually for me, I'd say that law school, surprisingly or not, works very well with the military, in that when I was doing my JD at Osgoode, I was fairly upfront with my professors at the beginning of the year, saying that, hey, I'm in the military, and I was sometimes working 2 or 3 weekends a month. So depending on your availability, some people can work more than others. And the typical expectation for reservists is one evening a week and 1 to 2 weekends a month. And I was a course officer, so sometimes I was working more than that. So for leaders or officers, some people will work 2 evenings a week and 2 weekends a month, but that's relatively extreme. And what I really did was, if you mentioned your professors up front, and I made a point of selecting where I could pay courses where a paper was the final evaluation, in that it's much easier for professors to give an extension for papers than it is for exams. And so typically this was a pattern that was consistent, and I didn't really have any issues throughout my JD to do it. And it was a benefit in that it kept you sane from being very immersed in case law and reading, 100% exams. Okay, let's go and play in the woods for a weekend. So it was a nice break from the routine. In graduate studies, it was, because it's much more self-regulated, it doesn't really become an issue. In fact, my deployment to Poland happened while I was doing my master's. So I did the coursework, started writing my paper, and then it's oh, do you want to deploy? Went away for 6 months, came back, and then I finished December of the year following. So oftentimes one professor gave me 2 or 3 extra months to write my paper. So it's one of those I'd say that it's as long as you're upfront and you communicate, like it's actually a very good combination. And I think when I was doing my degree too, the forces actually had a program where they would pay a certain amount of money while you're doing your studies. The program kind of come and goes in terms of the funding, but that's also a nice perk for that.
Frédéric.
Oui, mon expérience est un peu différente. Pour moi, la priorité, c'est vraiment mes études. Donc, moi, j'essaie de concilier dans l'autre sens. Donc, c'est vraiment mon unité qui est super compréhensive avec mes études. Puis, ils vont toujours me demander avant de me proposer un projet, est-ce que tu as le temps de faire ça? Est-ce que ça te tente de faire ça? Maintenant, le défi, c'est de dire non. Je suis quelqu'un de curieux, j'ai toujours envie de m'impliquer. Donc, j'essaie toujours de faire comme une évaluation de mon temps puis de bien gérer mon horaire. Mais en général, l'institution des Forces armées canadiennes encourage énormément l'éducation. Je dirais que pour les officiers, le bac est obligatoire. Puis à un certain moment dans notre carrière, la maîtrise est fortement encouragée, même obligatoire. Donc, nécessairement, ils vont nous encourager puis nous faciliter la vie aussi en termes de nos études. Donc, moi, mon truc, c'est vraiment de me faire des listes, d'y aller une chose à la fois. Puis je pense qu'on apprend aussi que la perfection est difficile à atteindre, puis on finit par être juste compréhensif aussi envers nous-mêmes, puis à se mettre des objectifs qui sont réalisables. Donc ça fait partie de la vie militaire, mais parfois, si je veux prioriser un exercice militaire versus du temps en classe, je vais le faire, mais après, je vais vivre avec les conséquences. Donc, c'est ce genre de décision qu'on apprend à faire, mais je pense que pour moi, ça fonctionne bien, puis mon unité est super compréhensive, puis ils vont toujours essayer de m'accommoder du mieux qu'ils peuvent.
Okay. I can plug the Student Affairs Office. We do as well often work with students such as yourself if we need to provide some academic accommodation. So whether or not it's facilitating the ability to write an exam or an extension on a paper. But thank you.
Oui, je m'excuse, j'aurais dû dire ça aussi. L'année, au printemps, quand j'ai dû déployer en CHSLD, j'ai communiqué avec le SCO, puis tout de suite, j'ai eu une réponse. Mes professeurs ont été super impliqués rapidement aussi, puis on a tout de suite essayé d'être créatifs dans les manières pour moi de passer mes examens. Donc, certains profs ont offert des formats un peu différents. Finalement, ça s'est super bien fait, puis j'ai pu faire mes examens en différé. Mais à travers mon expérience sur le SCO a été vraiment supporteur là-dedans.
Merci. Et puis maintenant, pour les derniers mots, il y a des autres choses que vous aimeriez partager avec nous autres. Michael, any last words? Is there anything else you'd like to share? Michael, Darian, Frederick, anything about your experiences?
Well, I guess being in the military, there's all sorts of weird and wacky things that can happen. And I can say that I think I've been involved in 2 lawsuits now surrounding the Canadian Armed Forces. Once was just walking, doing a rucksack march and having a collision with a cyclist. And that was my first introduction to, I guess, proceedings against the Crown Act and, having to provide testimony to a lawyer. And this was before I went to law school. The second time was being named personally in a lawsuit when a member wasn't happy with treatment, I guess, how he was being treated. And again, that reinforced to me is that, the Canadian Armed Forces is a very interesting place in that whether you are a lawyer or not, is that you will be exposed to law and legal issues like one way or another. And I'll say also that, that some of it is a little bit of a bummer note, but positively is that, while being in the Canadian Armed Forces, is that I was always surprised by how important the law is in that, even people who again may not be formally exposed to the law, like understand the importance of procedural fairness, right? The rule of law, that people can't just do what they want, is that there's we're all held to a very high level of ethical conduct, and that there are very real consequences, when people don't live up to it. So that's why it's almost like a self-policing community. And I think that if this is something that you're looking for in terms of doing something like outside of reading and mooting, that this is often a very good complement for practical experience. Thank you.
Thank you. Darian.
Yeah, so I think I can only speak for myself when I think when I say that, I think the Canadian military offers you some interesting experiences and some interesting opportunities. So, like obviously for me, like being an armored soldier, like I've been able to deal with like quite a few different like firearms essentially that people haven't been able to use, like just some interesting things like that, armored vehicles that I can drive. Like there's these kind of interesting opportunities. So like, I guess that's very easy to just get out of the way, but I think more globally and more in line with education, like Michael was saying, like the Army kind of gives you a set of values. It kind of inculcates you with a set of values and a set of like a sort of code of conduct which you follow. And in a professional sense and in an academic sense, I think that serves you greatly in your future endeavors, right? Like when for the most part, when people kind of think of somebody in the military, perhaps like you might think somebody with like that kind of embodies like Canadian values and things like that, because that's what we're supposed to do, right? So I think with me, my training that has really done that. Like I feel like prior to joining to now, like the time that I've had in here has really changed me, created me into a better person. So in sort of that sense, I think the Canadian military has definitely given me the opportunity to become a better person. And in terms of legal experiences, I've sort of discovered the Canadian military's legal realm as well in some regards. And that too would be, it kind of has opened up perhaps a potential door to pursue a career as a JAG in the future, right? So it kind of does give you other opportunities as well that I hadn't known prior, that I now think, okay, that could be something, you know, down the line that might interest me perhaps. So it opens you other doors as well.
Thank you. Frédéric?
Oui, donc pour moi, être membre des Forces armées canadiennes, c'est le meilleur emploi étudiant ever. On a la chance de voyager à travers le Canada, à l'international, de parler les 2 langues officielles sur une base régulière. Ça, c'est quand même assez rare. Aussi, on a des cours qui sont offerts si jamais on n'est pas à l'aise dans une ou l'autre des langues. On se fait des amis, des collègues à travers le Canada, à travers le monde. Puis on fait vraiment partie d'une communauté qui est super spéciale, unique. Donc, pour moi, c'est vraiment un environnement qui m'a permis d'expérimenter beaucoup aussi. Je me rappelle quand j'ai terminé mon cours de recrue, puis 2 semaines après, je me suis fait offert d'aller en Colombie-Britannique sur un petit navire pour un exercice en mer. J'ai découvert que j'avais le mal de mer. J'ai découvert que je parlais pas bien anglais. J'ai découvert que je connaissais rien sur le monde maritime. Mais tu sais, mes amis étaient là, mes collègues étaient là pour bien m'encadrer. Puis c'est des exercices comme ça qui nous font aussi apprécier le fait que l'inconfort peut vraiment devenir une aventure excitante puis intéressante. Fait que je pense que au final, ma carrière dans le militaire, ça m'a beaucoup fait grandir. Puis j'ai atteint un certain standard que j'aurais pas atteint autrement. Donc pour moi, je suis vraiment reconnaissante de mon temps dans les Forces armées canadiennes.
Ben, merci énormément à vous joindre à moi aujourd'hui et de partager votre expérience dans les Forces armées canadiennes. Thank you so much for joining me and sharing your experiences. Greatly appreciated. I wish you well, and I wish you a good rest of the fall term. And again, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for having us.
I'd like to thank again Frédéric Morin, Michael Poon, and Dariet Barry for sharing their experience with the Canadian Armed Forces. Please join us on November 11th at 10:50 a.m. via Zoom when the Faculty of Law community will share in a moment of silence and hear Frédéric and Michael read In Flanders Fields by Canadian Lieutenant Colonel John McCrae in French and English. A Zoom link will be made available through the Student Affairs Office email notice, The Ask. Again, thank you so much for joining us, and I wish you all well. Be safe.